Hi, good evening. So I'm an engineer, as Annika said. I am in our Vancouver office, but I love coming out to Edmonton, originally an Albertan. And so I've been saying to a few people that I do really miss the energy that's in Alberta, especially in Edmonton and Calgary. So it's really nice, genuinely, to be out here. I am a civil engineer, and through civil engineering and throughout my career, I guess I started to learn that most of the really hard part of engineering wasn't about the stuff that they taught us in school. It wasn't necessarily the math and the physics. It was a lot of the social issues, or how to actually get something built, how to pay for things, how to work together, and some of the other big challenges of our time related to sustainability. So I'm also a member of the APEG BC, which is for the non-engineers out there, the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscientists of British Columbia, member of the Sustainability Committee, so trying to think about how we as engineers have a responsibility to implement sustainability into our work, and work with Urban and really enjoy the opportunities that brings. So I'm going to talk tonight about what I've called the infrastructure imagination imperative. And infrastructure, for those of you who may use different terms, which is perfectly understandable, the way that I talk about infrastructure is our public infrastructure, our roads, bridges, public pipes, public parks, wastewater treatment plants. So basically, the structures that we own that enable our quality of life. So that's kind of where I draw the line. My perspective is, as an engineer, working with infrastructure on a daily basis, but I think a lot of what I'm saying is relevant even if you are a citizen that doesn't necessarily work in infrastructure, but you use it, which is basically everybody, and how you can get involved in shaping infrastructure. So my main message is that I absolutely believe it's imperative that our infrastructure become the subject of our collective imagination. I think we all know to some extent and have experienced that imagination can actually change our lives, because it changes what we think is possible and therefore what we work towards. So as an engineer with a professional responsibility to society, and just as a citizen with a stake in the state of our future, I want to talk about how I think that we really need to use imagination to change the way that we dream up and design and manage and build our infrastructure. So I'm going to start with the imperative part, which I'll call the sober realization. I'm not really a doom and gloom kind of person, but the reality is that we as Canadians, and just as citizens of the planet and the human race, we have some pretty big issues that we're facing today, and even more threats to our collective future. And these are a reality, and I'm sure that you all know about them. Nothing I'm going to say is going to be new, but it's relevant as context, so just a brief refresher. First is resource use. So using a measure called ecological footprint, we're currently, as a global average, using 1.5 planets of resources. And any 6-year-old could tell you that we only have one planet right now that we can use the resources of. And so we're actually degrading our natural capital. We're going into deficit. It would take the Earth 1 year and 6 months, by the use of this calculator, to generate the resources and the capacity of our waste that we develop over just a year. And business as usual trajectory is not great. By 2030, we're at about 2 planets, and through this estimate, almost 3 full planets in the year 2050. The impacts of climate change are very real. They're happening today. We've got floods, forest fires, drought. We've got climate refugees. Earlier this year was a very significant point in our history where we had the first official climate refugees. There was a family from a Pacific island that was granted refugee status in New Zealand because their island was going to be underwater. And so when we look at climate refugees, we live in a very connected society, connected global planet. And so it's not just seaside developments or seaside communities that are going to be affected by sea level rise. We're all going to be dealing with this kind of an issue. There's the ever-increasing gap between the poor and the rich, and the dissatisfaction with the systems that we've developed to govern ourselves. Our public institutions are facing low trust and very high financial stress all at the same time. So what does all this have to do with infrastructure? So as I was saying before, infrastructure delivers our quality of life. Provides these services that really enable us to live the way that we live. And I don't think that many people would dispute that. But what if we recognize that the infrastructure that enables our quality of life is actually also contributing to degrading it? We've accepted designs and infrastructure systems that are, in effect, single purpose and single value. So many of them add value in one area, but actively degrade value in another area. So an example would be these roads add tremendous value in terms of moving us around, enabling us to trade our goods, get the kinds of goods and services that we want, have access to, but it also allows us all to emit a lot of carbon dioxide, contributing to climate change. Another example could be a wastewater treatment plant, which contributes tremendous value in terms of cleaning our water, protecting our environment, protecting our public health, but it degrades the property values around the wastewater treatment plant. It generates odor potentially, noise issues, even just the perception of having a wastewater treatment plant in an area is something that is deemed to be quite undesirable, and so we're degrading that value. A lot of the drainage infrastructure that we've developed in the past, we're now recognizing it's protecting us from flooding and adding value to our property, but it's potentially degrading the value of our waterways by adding a lot of volume at rapid rates and contributing contaminants. And so we've kind of plateaued our infrastructure development, and we've accepted that we develop these systems in a way that it doesn't really add value in all the ways that it could. So the rising costs of infrastructure and replacing and renewing them is incredible. In 2012, in Canada, there was a study done looking at the municipal costs of replacing infrastructure that was anywhere from fair to very poor condition. And across the country, it's $172 billion. And these costs only go up and up. You pair this with higher expectations of what should be delivered, and you've got a lot of financial stress on our public institutions. What's more is that a lot of people, we live in an increasingly mobile society, and a lot of people will move from community to community. They'll move to where they deem to be the best already, rather than staying to make somewhere better. And so this puts stress on our systems and our ability to maintain our infrastructure. Infrastructure is related to our inequality. Looking at lots of places around the world, it becomes really clear how infrastructure or lack thereof can contribute to inequality. This is a picture of a bus that I was riding in northern Ghana, and it sunk into the road. So that red dirt that you can kind of see there, that was the road. It was a major road connecting two centers, and the bus sunk into it as night was falling, and so it left all of us stranded about 2.5 hours from the nearest town. And so it becomes really clear that these people, this is a major barrier for them to be able to trade their goods, earn livelihood, have equal opportunity. But we don't have to look to Africa for examples of communities that lack the infrastructure to provide just basic quality of life or basic opportunity. We've got lots of examples of that in North America. And even in our urban centers, there are issues with the way that infrastructure is used or distributed that provides opportunity to some people over other people. We haven't changed a lot about how we design or build our infrastructure or how we manage it. There are slow changes being made, but the reality is that we're building our infrastructure at a very rapid and increasing rate. So to illustrate that, I'm not sure how many of you saw this, but it came out recently that China, in the last 3 years, has used more cement than the US used in the last 100 years. So that's pretty astounding. It illustrates the pace of development. Estimates say that 75% of the infrastructure that will exist in 2050 does not exist today. So 75%. Now, most of that won't take place in North America. Most of that will be in China, in different Asian countries, in Africa. But it will impact us in our globalized environment. It will place additional stress on our resources, our natural resources. It'll raise the prices of cement, of steel, increasing our infrastructure costs, making infrastructure more expensive for all 3 levels of government, which could potentially reduce trust in government again. And so all of these problems are really linked, and we really need to get our act together before we enter this downward spiral. So there's some changes happening, and these are really good. We're thinking about new ways to achieve the services that we achieve through our infrastructure, but they're not really happening fast enough or across enough infrastructure systems. There's still too many projects being done the same way we've always been doing them. And every time we make a decision about how we're going to build an infrastructure project, we're not just making a decision about today. These infrastructure decisions are very expensive. We're spending tremendous amounts of public money, and they last a really long time. So we're making decisions about how people are going to live and things they're going to be dealing with in 20 years, in 50 years, in 100 years. And I don't know if we often take time to appreciate those decisions that we're making for people in 20 years today. So if we're going to begin to address some of the issues that we're facing with our infrastructure, we really do need a transformative change, not just incremental change. And this can all sound like a lot of overwhelming news and can sound pretty daunting, but I think it's actually very exciting that our infrastructure can be connected to some of these bigger global issues, because it means that our infrastructure becomes a very significant leverage point. And if we can figure out how to transform some of our infrastructure systems, we can move the needle on some of these bigger global problems. So now for the pep talk. We can do this, but not necessarily the way that we've always done this. So this is the formula that we apply to problem solving. We become quite adept at it. We take really smart people and give them resources, so money, essentially, and they use some technical know-how, tools, techniques to solve the problem, right? But the problem is that we solve one problem, but we shift it off somewhere else, or we cause problems in a different area. And so we're kind of reaching the limits of solving problems this old way. We're creating new problems that we need to address. And they're not problems with not having smart enough people. We've never had such an educated society. They're not problems with not having the technical solutions. We've got lots of amazing tools and resources and academic literature that just sits on the shelf and is never touched and never looked at. And I'd argue it's not even a problem with not having enough money, because there is an abundance of global wealth, but we just haven't really figured out how to create a system that invests it in areas that are publicly productive all the time. So this doesn't mean that we don't need these things. I definitely still think we need smart people and resources and technical know-how. They're still necessary, but they're no longer sufficient. We can't do different things without doing things differently. And I really think that we need to harness our imagination, our collective imagination, to be able to do things differently. So a couple of years ago, I was working on a project, and our scope was to do the conceptual design for a wastewater treatment plant. And the wastewater treatment plant was a regulatory requirement because of some changing regulations. And people have been designing wastewater treatment plants for a long time. The expertise exists, and even though it's evolving still, there's lots of know-how about how to design a wastewater treatment plant. So it would have been very easy to just get some people together and say, build us a plant, put it here, so we can meet the regulations and check the boxes. But fortunately, some of the project leaders were quite visionary, And they recognized that, one, if they did that, there was some significant social and political risk. It's likely that people would not like the idea of having a smelly concrete box with a barbed wire fence around it, and probably not agree to pay for the rate changes that were needed to fund the treatment plant. But they also, project leaders also recognized that this could be a big opportunity to do something different. And so what they did was arrange the project in a way that demanded collective imagination be applied to the problem. They wondered, what else could we do here? So the project was done in a very participatory way and set up through a series of workshops. And the first workshop, I'll never forget, is a very interesting experience for me. There were probably 40 to 50 people in the room, and there were very powerful and senior people, all kinds of senior managers and expensive consultants from all over North America. We had all kinds of technical experts in on different wastewater treatment plant processes, you know, the top person in biosolids and the top person in effluent. And there were architects and ecologists and landscape architects, and there were facilitators that were brought in from the US to run this integrative process. And I was working with the facilitators to try and learn more about their process. And before the facilitators even asked everybody in the room to introduce themselves and share their very impressive and powerful titles, they posed a question to the room, and they said, at your tables, I want you to discuss this question. The question was, what is the potential of this project to evolve life in this unique place? And I think I turned beet red and started sweating and just wanted to crawl under my table and thought, what are you guys doing? You can't pose this kind of question to all of these very serious and technical people in this room. They're going to completely abandon the process, think this is ridiculous, and the project's going to go sideways, and I'm going to lose all my credibility, and this is awful. What are you guys doing? But that didn't happen. I was very surprised that most people, not all people, but most people really engaged in the conversation, and it actually got them to leave their powerful status hats at the door and just start thinking about the project and forget about their agenda for a minute and think about, what could we do? What could we achieve? And it wasn't about spending more money or getting smarter people in the room, but it was just about thinking about things differently. So that workshop really set the tone for the project. And throughout the project, we saw a lot of great things. We saw lots of innovative ideas, ideas about, you know, using the wastewater effluent to grow algae, which could then convert to biogas, innovative ideas around reconnecting the neighborhood to the waterfront that it had been disconnected from through industrial development for a number of years. We saw lots of examples of how the community, how they could do more with less. So expanding the project boundaries, looking outside just the box and thinking about what are all the community amenities that are needed in this area, and how can we incorporate them into this facility so that it doesn't necessarily cost more money, but we can still achieve what was desired. How can we use this treatment plant to revitalize this road that's kind of industrial commercial? How can we use it as a public space for this community that's kind of been neglected and surrounded by industrial development? They built a lot of social capital by involving the public, getting the public really excited through this imaginative process. They really invited different ideas from the working committees. And through that social capital, it's been very successful in building some of the political capital, which can also translate more easily to getting the funding that they need for the project. The working together was incredibly impressive. I don't know how many people here have ever worked on a project with different disciplines, especially projects where you've got engineers and architects, but it can often be a little adversarial. Sometimes each profession thinks that they're the best and they're the right ones and discredit the other ones. But this was a totally different environment. It was an area where both professions, well, all professions really, because there were quite a lot of different professionals that came to the table, but everybody really respected what the others could bring. And there was a different collaboration than what I've seen, where everybody was truly making decisions together and working through the hard stuff together. They wouldn't take it away and make a decision and then pass it on to the next discipline to do their work and work in a line. They really worked together in a way that helped them achieve more than they ever could have achieved on their own. And I think, actually, most importantly, that everybody had a lot more fun. And the fun is really important because it generates energy to actually get things done. So if you're trying something really innovative, there are probably going to be all kinds of obstacles in your way that you need to overcome. But if you're having more fun, you're more willing to spend the energy that's required to get through things. And it's not necessarily like party fun. It's more challenging puzzle fun. It's more, wow, this is a meaningful project, and it's really calling to me and to all of the things I can contribute as a person, and not just what's required in my job description. It's requiring me to be creative and imaginative, and it's requiring me to care for my community. So that really makes a difference in the amount of energy that people are willing to contribute, and that can make the difference between taking a project and just putting it on the shelf and actually making it happen. This is the resulting conceptual design, and so this project stands out to me as the project where it's been most explicit that imagination was incorporated into the design intentionally throughout the whole process. But there are lots of other examples as well, and I've seen lots of examples where people have brought in imagination and worked together differently to achieve different things. And really every infrastructure project is an excuse to work together in a way that's different and to try something new. So here's a couple of examples that I really like. While developing the eco-resort of Playa Viva in Mexico, the people behind the development, they asked, what if instead of just doing a low-impact eco-development, we could actually restore the environment and restore the local community and the economy with our development? And so they worked together with the community and came up with the design to understand the real ecological sensitivities so that they could restore an estuary and work with the community to set up a salt-producing cooperative. At the Bullitt Center in Seattle, it's a commercial facility, and they asked, what if we could change the marketplace for green buildings, the whole marketplace, by challenging some of the assumptions about what we can and can't do and proving people otherwise? So they wanted to go absolutely big and create a buzz. They, again, just didn't want to go to low impact. They wanted to actually make things better. They wanted to use this building as an anchor to revitalize an area and revitalize a community. They wanted to generate more energy than they used. They wanted to treat more water than they used. The West Cape development in South Africa is it's essentially a city on the edge of Cape Town. And the final community is projected to have 200,000 homes and be a home to 400,000 people. A big focus on housing people who live in informal settlements, recognizing that that's a very big challenge in urban Africa. To read a quote of theirs, they're really acknowledging the problems in the city and the country and the continent that they want to deal with. So they say, the extent of social breakdown that is incurred in African urban settings is reflected in increases in crime, family structure breakdown, drug and alcohol abuse, teenage pregnancy increase, youth radicalization, sexual and physical abuse, and marginalization of the poor. Wealthy residents hide behind walls and gated enclaves, while poor inhabitants in urban areas have fewer social safety nets available to adapt to crises and disasters that may occur. So they're acknowledging the context that they're starting to work with. And then the lens that they're focusing on with this development is essentially, what if we could build a community that addressed that social breakdown? So what if it wasn't just about building a city that earned us money on our lots, but what if we built it for the sole purpose of addressing social breakdown? What would that kind of a community look like? And how does that change our design process? So that's what they're working through now. It's a really fascinating project. In Masdar City that they're building in the UAE, or have built up, they asked, what if we could build a city that was zero carbon and zero waste. So they're talking about powering everything with solar energy and designing everything to really reduce energy consumption to radically low levels. And this is just an example of integrating public art with some infrastructure, and it's public art that people use, which is even better. So it's a family water fountain, and maybe this isn't going to transform the face of our infrastructure and move the needle on our big world problems, but what I like about this is that it will get people thinking about our water system, our fire hydrant, how there are more opportunities to use that. You know, our infrastructure doesn't have to be so single purpose, single use. So how do we do more of these? Some key do's and don'ts. Don't avoid trying. I think that's actually a very common challenge, is that a lot of people are really busy, and it's much easier and more efficient to just do things the way that we've been doing them. You have to get things going. But a really easy way to disrupt that pattern is just start where you are and start with a quick conversation. You know, just chat with maybe your colleagues, or if you don't work in infrastructure, maybe have a chat with some of your neighbors about, hey, I heard about this project. What else do you think is possible here? What else could we achieve? Don't make assumptions about how people will respond when you ask them to bring their infrastructure imagination to a problem. Don't design things to be fail-safe, because we probably won't get anywhere new. But you can think about things as safe-fail. So that's just about building lots of checks into your process and trying things incrementally where you can check in if you're kind of careening off the path to certain failure. And if so, you can abandon at that point and continue on with how you've done things, but at least you've tried. My favorite one is don't expect magic. And what I'm referring to there is how we're working together. So a lot of people will try and just get a whole bunch of people together in a room and think that this is collaboration, this is interdisciplinary working, and we've got everybody together and magic will happen. Get everybody together in the room, but then think about what you want them to do and how you want them to solve a problem, or what kinds of outcomes you want them to work towards. So at the end of the day, all of the examples that I shared with you, none of them are solving all of the problems in every single way, but they are all steps towards helping us think differently and transform the way that we design and use our infrastructure. Applying imagination to our infrastructure is not going to be this silver bullet for solving our problems, but it can be a really big lever. And I think given the pressing nature of our issues, we can't really afford to ignore this big lever. So what kinds of things can we imagine? Thank you.